from the government, and I'm here to help.
Take a look, it's in a book.
Some members of the community use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda.
Let's watch. Figure it out.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Whoa. I didn't expect that voice. Okay.
Oh, you are not the first person to tell me that.
I guaranteed I'm not. My goodness. I didn't expect that. Okay. I'm good. How are you?
I am wonderful. It's Friday. It's nice out in Colorado, so I can't complain. Welcome back to the We Figured It Out podcast. I'm your boy, Michael.
And I'm Matt.
And today we are here with somebody for an interview / spew whatever you're willing to kind of spew session. Amber from Cult.Life.Escaped. She has a TikTok and an Instagram, and you can find them. We'll post them in the show notes when this is all said and done here. So, Amber, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited.
How are things going for you?
Oh, just living my best life. I drove about 250 miles today, but just doing my thing. I drive a lot for work, so.
Okay. Well, 250 miles is definitely a lot. That's far in our state. Very far.
Yeah, right? You'd be almost out of the state, right?
Yes, almost. So you want to give the listeners a little description of kind of what your channel is before we get into it so that they can be like, this is going to be awesome. Because for me, I feel like I'm sitting kind of in like a TLC episode, That's just kind of how I feel when I listen to them. So I like it a lot.
Well, thank you. So my name is Amber. I grew up in the Jehovah's Witness cult. I spent almost 38 years in it. I woke up at 37 and a half. I'm 5th generation Jehovah's Witness, which is very rare, I think. So my family line through my dad's side goes back to the early 1900s before it was even called the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Wow.
So.
First off, I didn't even know it was called something before that. And 5th generation, that's insane. How do they track that?
The organization?
Yes.
No, they don't track any of that. It's just that, we know that it's kind of, I don't know, I guess a claim to fame in a way. I did have a comment from one girl and she said she was 5th generation. I was like, oh my gosh, there's more of us out there,
Had she left also?
Yeah, she had left also. And she actually said that her family built the podiums that go in every Kingdom Hall. So that was, my guess is for free.
Wow. Yeah.
That's usually how that goes.
Yeah, most of the stuff there I would assume is probably for free, as within, not a knock on any religion. They all kind of expect that, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yes, but in this one, it's a privilege. So.
Okay. Do you want to get into that? You want to start at the upbringing? You said 5th generation and 40 years in it. Do you want to kind of start how you're just born right into that, essentially?
Right. So both my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they divorced when I was a baby. They got married very young. My mom was 18, my dad was 17. My grandparents had to sign off on it for my dad. That's fairly common in the organization, just because if you are fornicating and you don't get married, then you risk getting disfellowshipped and shunned and kicked out, essentially. So a lot of people marry very young because they don't want to get in trouble. And what ends up happening is you thought the guy at the Kingdom Hall was cute, and then you find out, well, he's not a really good husband. And now you're stuck. So, because the only grounds for divorce is adultery. So doesn't matter if he's physically abusive, doesn't matter. You just need to be a better wife.
Really?
So, yeah, that's kind of the advice that's given. I know of a woman who her husband was beating her, and an elder's wife told her she needed to stop nagging him so much, and then he probably wouldn't do that. I don't think that was the answer, but that's what was given. That's the advice that was given. So I was born into it. You don't know any different. It's
Do you,
it's your life, it's normal.
do you
So
still have to go through like say for Catholics, what's that, communion, or even though you're born into it, do they still expect you to do all the, I'm sorry, I'm so uneducated and I don't.
Yeah,
so
so like maybe we should start there. Like, what are the differences? Like, because I was just thinking that like too, really. Because I mean, what is even
so
Jehovah's
Catholics
Witness
will
even?
baptize as babies.
Okay.
Um, Jehovah's Witnesses don't baptize as babies. They don't believe in that. However, if you're 10 years old and you want to get baptized, everybody is like thrilled. They think, oh, what a good kid, and the parents are raising them well. And the problem is that the baptism is not a valid biblical baptism. So they don't baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. What you're essentially doing is agreeing to a verbal contract. Because when you get up to be baptized, so like at a convention or an assembly, you stand up and they ask you two questions. And the first one's like, have you repented of your sins? Blah, blah, blah. Fine. And then the second one is that something along the lines of like, do you understand that by getting baptized, you are now identified as one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you are like accepting that Jehovah's organization, like you're essentially just baptizing into the religion, but you don't realize that in the moment. So we all stand up there and they ask the question, we go, yes, like robots, and then they ask the second question, yes, and then you go and you get baptized. And that is the moment that they gotcha. Because if you say I didn't get baptized ever, they couldn't disfellowship me, they couldn't do anything. That is that's the agreement. So when you were baptized, that's what gives them the authority to, pull you in the back room, discipline you, punish you, have you shunned, whatever it may be.
So you can still participate in everything and not be baptized?
Yeah, I mean, you're technically not considered a Jehovah's Witness, but so my husband was never baptized in it. So he was born and raised into it. His dad was an elder. He's, one of 9 kids, so they'd take up the whole front row of the Kingdom Hall. And uh, several of his brothers and sisters did get baptized, but when he actually went to try to get baptized, the brother, the elder that he was talking to said, I just don't think you're ready, and that was God, because he, one, if he had gotten baptized, he probably would have gotten disfellowshipped. We wouldn't have met because we met on our way to a convention and in traffic. Because, he's smooth like that. And
Yeah, hey, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
It's
right, he
true.
left a note on my car, and here we are, what, 22 years later.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
but because of that, so like for instance, when I got disfellowshipped for fornication with him. So they disfellowshipped me, but nothing happened to him, and everyone still talked to him. So I was shunned, but everyone else still talked to him. So their whole thing of like keeping the congregation clean really doesn't make any sense, because if you were truly trying to keep it clean, you wouldn't talk to him either.
Yeah, or they'd expect him not to speak with you either, right? They'd try to cut all ties from every angle, not just one little
They do, because
corner.
your
Yeah.
family shuns you as well. So everybody shuns you. And so that right there just goes to show a little bit of the hypocrisy within the organization, that it really has to do with punishment, and they really push you to get baptized before you're 18. One of the governing body members, he's not anymore because I guess God made a mistake and put him in that position and they took him out. And so he said, well, if you're not ready to get baptized, then maybe you're not ready to get a driver's license, which really points to the age, right? Because you're talking about 15, 16-year-old children. So you're pressuring children to get baptized, and they don't know what they're.
That was gonna be my next question. Like, what, like, is shunning the worst it gets, or like, it feels like they hold a lot over your head, just even in baptism.
Yeah, I mean, shunning's like the worst thing, right? I mean, I have friends of mine I've had, and I still claim that they're friends because, it's not their fault that they haven't woken up, but they, I've had friends of mine for over 20 years. They don't speak to me anymore. They've unfriended me on socials. They don't speak to me. They, don't respond. And the thing is if they texted me or called me tomorrow, I would answer and welcome them with open arms. It's not their fault. I mean, even the
You
things that I've heard from my own mother, I don't blame her for those things. She lives in fear. So it's
yeah,
it's really a sad thing, but they truly feel like, well, and also you can get in trouble. So if, say, you were baptized, I'm baptized, I get disfellowshipped and you talk to me and they find out about it, you can get in trouble.
Yeah, I get shunned too.
Y- Potentially.
Right on.
so so let's go back to what Matt said. Like, what makes the Jehovah Witness different from just Christianity? What am I?
So in
What?
Christianity, the point is a relationship. The point is not a devotion to a religion. And if it is a devotion to a religion, then you need to run. But for them, so when it first started, I'll just give you like a breakdown of the history of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Sweet, because
So
we've all had people like come to the door and tell and
Right, right. Like everybody knows it's the Jehovah's Witnesses too.
well,
right.
I've had them come and they ask you, like a trick question. It's like, oh, wouldn't you agree that Jesus will be the leader in heaven? You're like, yeah, and they're like, okay, yeah, well, he's this governing body, and I'm like, whoa, hold on here,
Yeah.
and then you get trapped into it, and you're
And
like,
all of
okay,
that is trained. They're trained
yeah,
to do all of that. They're not actually preaching out of the love of
no,
people.
yeah,
They're doing it because, well, for the longest time they were counting that time. They stopped that, but we can get into that later. But basically, what
yeah,
happened is in the late 1800s, there was a guy who split off from Seventh-day Adventist, and there was a boom of religions that popped up in the 1800s. Like the Mormons started in 1830. Um, what became the Jehovah's Witnesses started in like 1870. I think officially it started in 1879. That's when he started the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And they were just a publishing company. I mean, they were printing literature and they were distributing literature. I don't really vilify that guy because he didn't say, look, I have the true religion and everybody needs to listen. I mean, some of his literature specifically said, beware of organization, which I find comical because now we call it the organization. And he also said, don't try to bind people's consciences. If if we say something or something's said and you don't agree with it or you come to a different understanding, then you need to follow what God leads you to and what the Bible leads you to. That is not what's going on now. So the second guy that came in after he died is really what was a bad thing. That guy was an attorney slash judge, and that's where all of the like rigid rules started to come into play. And he was ridiculous. He built like a mansion in San Diego. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. It's called Beth Sareem. He built like this 10-bedroom mansion, and it was for the returning prophets or whatever. It was supposed to be like
okay,
for David and Abraham and all of this stuff. Now
yeah,
most JWs don't know that, right? Because that's an embarrassing history. So once those people die off, or you just don't talk about it anymore. And that's how they continue to chug along, is they make changes when their doctrine proves to be false, and then people forget about it the longer they go on. And so he came in, he was the second president, and then I think there was Nathan Noor was like the third president, and then they started a governing body in 1971, and now they are actually pushing in their propaganda that there was a first century governing body made up of like Paul and whoever. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I haven't seen the words governing body
No.
anywhere. And the sad thing is that the people are, they're defending it now. That I say there is no governing body. There was no governing body in the first century. And they go, yes, there was, because they were told. And they don't read the Bible. Like, they cherry pick scripture, and so they don't really read it. And so they started this governing body. I don't know how many men there were. There's currently 11 now. It's it's been, a lower amount. It's been a higher amount up to like 20, I think. And they control everything. They're in New York. So God only chooses, white guys in New York. And although
That's
they did,
crazy.
yeah, they did put a black guy in there in like 99 or 2000 or something, mainly because I think a lot of people were like, hey, how come God's only choosing these white guys? And so they
Right.
go, oh, well, to shut people up, we'll show we're not racist, even though I can show literature that proves that they were. And so they put him in there, and they became televangelists. So, we didn't ever see the governing body. You knew of them, you heard of them, you may have known certain names, you didn't know what they looked like. And so they've slowly been increasing their authority and exalting themselves. And, the scriptures say, humble yourself. And they don't do that. They exalt themselves. And based on the scriptures, they will be humbled. And I would rather humble myself than have God do it. That's just me. So, because he's going to do it way better than I would have. And so they really became televangelists, and they started this whole jw.org broadcast thing, I think in like 2010-ish. And they started putting TVs up in every Kingdom Hall. And so now you literally see, I mean, and you can get like the little app on your TV, and you can watch them. They're in your home now. And so people feel like this connection to the people that are connected to God, so they claim. And I actually released a video yesterday talking about, them becoming an idol.
Yeah, that's a
And
cult.
yeah, and it's sad because it's like it doesn't matter what they say, it's true. And it doesn't matter that what they said before isn't true anymore, because what they're saying now is true. And so they've convinced their members that change and all of these updates and new light, because that's what they call it too, new light,
Oh, new
is,
light.
yeah. And so they claim that, and the members have accepted that all of these changes show that they're chosen by God, because look, they're willing to change based on what God has revealed to them, even though they admitted they're not inspired by God. They're not inspired and they're not infallible. That's what they literally said, which means God's not speaking to you and you make mistakes. So
If
how are you any different from the rest of us?
if you muddy the waters just enough that you're not right or wrong, but the other person's not right or wrong either, then where's the argument anymore? And that's kind
And
of,
and people act like we don't worship the governing body, but if they make a change, you don't question it. So you
yeah.
don't have to bow down.
No. What
I
did
mean, anything can be an idol. Your phone can be an idol. I mean,
oh,
anything could be,
absolutely.
Right.
any obsession that you have. And and that's what's going on now. It's very little about God. It's nothing really about Jesus, because they don't believe in the Trinity.
It's borderline
So,
Yes.
Catholicism. That you're right with that. Like it's just a bunch of idol worship, really. I mean, it's okay.
Um,
yeah.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it now.
Trinity, there you go. That was the word that I was trying to remember. They don't believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The governing body is interesting too, because throughout the gospel, you see Jesus literally tell them to leave uh, things to Caesar that are Caesar's, right? Render things unto Caesar that are Caesar's, and render things unto God that are God, right? And that's a
Correct.
very open verse saying, don't mix the two right there. There isn't a governing body. There's one king. But
Hmm.
anyway,
Yeah,
back to,
but the thing is that people people want to be told what to do. I mean, we live in a society like just tell me what to do. Tell me, my husband used to have a pet store many years ago, and he has always been one to like, don't tell me what to do. I will I'll do research, I'll figure it out, which is why he was never a good JW. And so but he would be like obsessed with dog health, dog nutrition, that kind of thing. And people would go, well, what do I feed my dog? And he goes, well, you could do this or you could do that and you could do that. And he goes, just tell me what to buy. And he never wanted to do that because he felt like, well, that's like really salesy, or and I'm telling him what to do. And I go, but people want that. You
Mhm.
don't, but people do. And that's the danger, is these people, they like being told what to do, even though deep down they don't. But it's like, it's easier. Just tell me what to do. Okay, I need to go to the meetings twice a week. I need to go out in the service. I need to not talk to
Especially
any.
if they're vulnerable, right?
Right. And they target the vulnerable too. So when they go door to door, I mean, a lot of what they ask is like, have you ever thought if you're going to see your dead loved one again? And so they like target the grieving. I mean, there's been, plenty of scenarios where they looked up obituaries and contacted people to reach out to them
Oh wow.
in a sad state. And people are confused, and you seem to have the answers, and people want answers, and they claim to have all of them. And so when you study with them, they love bomb you. I mean, you're so welcomed, and they tell you, oh, we'll answer your questions. You question anything. Oh, and they tell you to question your own pastor, priest, whatever, because that's what happened to my grandparents on my mom's side, because they converted from Catholicism in the 60s. And they told my grandmother, ask your priest these questions. And so she goes to her priest, and her priest basically said, well, that's for us to know. Well, the JWs are like, well, we don't feel that way. We'll tell you.
Oh wow.
And so she converted in, and my
Stolen from
grandfather
another
wasn't
religion.
happy. Yeah, and my grandfather wasn't happy about it, but men get clout. So eventually he came around, and he's an elder now, and so women, the most that you can hope for is to become an elder's wife, essentially. That's the highest level. Or, if your husband becomes like a circuit overseer, or even part of the governing body. I mean, I guess the wives of the governing body are, the most elite, but women don't have any role in the congregation at
It's
all.
so it's very secretive, the governing body, only being in New York and like only on the other end of a phone. It's very
Well, and not even that. I mean, try to call Bethel. Call Bethel right now. See if you can get, a governing body member on the phone. You can't. And that's the other thing. I mean, talk about being so disconnected from Jesus. I mean, Jesus was like, everybody come, come, come. And they were like, they've got like armed guards at the front of Bethel. So if you trust in the Lord, I don't know why you need that, but
yeah, that's pretty crazy. So growing born into it and then growing up into it, when did you notice that maybe things weren't straight on, like not necessarily a cult, but when did you begin to question?
so I was I mean, I was a devout JW, I mean, it was my whole family is in it, with the exception of like one aunt and one uncle, I think. And, but they were never baptized. So like the family will still talk to them. And I never really questioned anything. I mean, my family didn't. Why would I, I mean, they claim it's the true religion. They call it the truth. So that's an indoctrination as well. So, we refer to it as the truth. So, Michael came into the truth. Michael left the truth, that kind of terminology. And so it's so ingrained. It's the truth. It's the truth. And now they're talking. I mean, I saw a video today, and they were talking about, um, Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob and Esau, and talking about, you know, um, that Esau married out of the truth. I'm like, you guys are trying to put this in in the Old Testament, like that's what you're trying, and they are, because it's validating everything. So, the JWs go, oh yeah, the truth, it's always been here, even though they didn't start until the late 1800s, you know, and
Hmm.
their whole viewpoint is like, well, there was a sprinkling of true Christians between the death of the apostles until the JW started. So that's a whole other story. But growing up, I mean, you do it. You don't question anything. It's your life. It's everybody's life that you know. And we're not supposed to be associating with non-JWs either. And so that's another thing,
It's like
with a
North
cult.
Korea.
Right. And with a cult, most people, because I get a lot of JWs, they're like, it's not a cult. And because most people's idea of what a cult is like Waco or Jonestown, or, you're living on a compound, you're totally isolated, segregated. That's the best cults are the ones that are hiding in plain sight. And they tell their members, I mean, everybody outside of the organization is considered bad association. And a scripture that's like beat into us is bad association spoils useful habits.
Oh.
So, yeah. And it's an assumption, right? So like, say
Hmm.
I was hanging out with you and I went to, visit family or something. The first thing they're going to be like, what congregation do you go to? It's an assumption that you were a witness. And, you know, so I mean, we marry into it because the scriptures say to marry, only marry in the Lord. And
Do are there like you said it's not like the typical what people think of cult compound style. Is it more like what am I thinking here? How like Mormons just kind of have neighborhoods or suburbs? Is that kind of how
no, it's not like that. Like we
they're
just
just
live
everywhere?
wherever.
Okay.
Yeah, we have secular jobs. We go to school. Many are homeschooled. I mean, I homeschool my kids, but not because of the JW thing.
Yes.
I just homeschool them because I don't like the public school system. But, many do homeschool so that their kids can be in the full-time service, which is like going door to door. And it's just, they're hiding in plain sight and they seem normal. I mean, most people know a JW, or they've worked with one. They seem like nice people, although I get a lot of comments where they're like, they're not nice people, and I'm like, yeah, I know. But it's not really their fault. I mean, they're taught that they have the true religion. Everybody else doesn't. Everybody else is in Satan's world. And we're not supposed to associate with those people. So we distance ourselves. We're not going to happy hour with people after work typically. And so you tell people that they're chosen and they're special, and you also essentially separate them from Christ because, the governing body has kind of put themselves in that position. And people that aren't truly connected with God aren't convicted by God to love their neighbor, and so they really can be nasty. And I've been on a couple of lives, and it's shocking to me, one, that JWs are even in there because this is all apostate material. Anything that's negative about the organization is considered apostate. And so, but they get on there and they're mean and they're nasty. And it's honestly heartbreaking because they don't realize where that's coming from. And it's coming from the disconnection from God. And so, but growing up, I mean, growing up was, so now it's 2 days a week. So you typically have like a day during the week that you go to the meeting. For us, it was always Tuesday. And then you go on Sunday. And then usually, you go out in service on Saturdays. But growing up, we also had book study, so I went Tuesday, Thursday, out in service Saturday, to the meeting on Sunday. And then before I got baptized, you have to have a Bible study, which is not a Bible study, that you study their book. And you have to do that before they'll let you get baptized, which is not biblical.
That's
Um,
you should be able to do that anytime, any place, anywhere.
right. So, I mean, when I was in high school, it was like school on Monday, school on Tuesday, meeting on Tuesday night, which was 2 hours, Wednesday I had school, and then, a friend came over to do this Bible study. Thursday I had school and book study. Friday I had school. Saturday I had service. Sunday I had, the meeting. So it's your whole life. And so I get a lot of people that get upset, like current JWs that get upset that I say we, because like, hello, it was my life for almost 40 years.
That's a long time.
So, yeah, and it was all I
That
knew.
goes back
And
to your friends too that don't talk to you in the shunning and stuff. It's like you still knew me for 40 years, regardless of what somebody's saying about me.
yeah,
But
and one of them, we went to school together, like after high school, we went to like a trade school together, and we were roommates. We've gone on girls' trips together. It's like we were we told each other we loved each other when we got off the phone. It's we were very close, and she won't speak to me because I'm scary now. When you say that you don't agree with the governing body, that's scary because
so,
they've never thought to disagree with them.
um, while we're talking about it right now, I feel like it's a perfect time to ask. But I'd written down here, um, you talk a lot about it and all the stuff within it and all that. But for you now, like in this moment now, what's your biggest fear and struggle with being like out of it but still connected almost? Because you're kind of leaning there now. So I don't know. I'm like, I might as well ask that now.
You mean like with my family
Just
or
you in general, whatever, however you want to answer that. I feel like, yeah, what's your biggest struggle with it?
so I will say this. I've done enough research that there is no doubt that this is not the true religion, that it is a cult. I don't have those struggles, whereas a lot of, ex-JWs still battle with guilt and like, did I make the right decision? And that kind of, I absolutely made the right decision.
Okay, you
It is
you
not the
sniffed that
true.
question right out of me right
Yeah,
there.
I don't struggle with guilt. Now, when I first started to wake up, so that happened in early 2022. And what woke me up, obviously didn't wake up everyone, but a lot of people woke up during COVID. And COVID is what woke me up too. And what happened is we were on Zoom, fine. The whole world shut down. I understood that. And I felt like what a blessing, right? It's a blessing that we can still get on Zoom and look what God has helped us be able to do. And, what a blessing. And so it was great. I didn't have to, rush home from work and change and then jet out the door, didn't have to, we could just log on. Well, we live out in the country. Our internet's not great. And so we were constantly getting like bumped off of Zoom. So we stopped putting the video on because it was just too much. And our neighbor runs a rodeo and she ran the rodeo like on the days and nights that we would have the meeting. It just that's how it worked out. So you can hear her, calling out barrel racing scores, and the dogs are barking, or siren goes by and the dogs start howling. It was very chaotic. And for 6 months I was like, okay, this is great. But then churches started fighting in the courts to reopen, but we weren't. And they were like, stay home, it's fine. But we were always told growing up, you have to go. You have to meet together. Never forsake the gathering. That's
You
the
have God's
scripture.
protection.
That was another thing that my husband was like, what are you afraid of? And if you think that this is the true religion and you're saved, because you're a
Go out
JW,
and test it.
then right, then what are you so afraid of?
I went out
And
and tested mine. My church never closed.
Yeah.
oh, good for them. Tell them I said good job on that. But yeah, so they closed down, and at first I was okay with it, and then I started really struggling in 2021, and I even asked for what's called a shepherding call, which is like you ask the elders to meet with you to encourage you, or so I thought. Come to find out it was just a guilt and shame fest. And I just said, I'm struggling, and our internet's bad, so it's hard to pay attention, and whatever. And all I got was, well, have you been making all the meetings? have you been praying enough? Have you been doing this? Have you been doing that? You know, well, I'm struggling. I called you for a reason. And I'm crying and I got nothing. You know, I mean, yeah, a little bit of like, oh, you know, and a prayer or something, but it was always like, you're not doing enough, and that's why you're struggling. And it was, but I was still mentally in it. So being that, you know, we log off Zoom, I close the laptop, and I think, why can't I? What's wrong with me? You know, everybody else seems fine, and I'm not. What's wrong with me? And so I just kept chugging along, and they started pushing the vaccine like hardcore, and we're, you know, we're not big on that anyway. I don't care. You want to get it.
Yeah.
But
Just
I
don't tell me
didn't,
what to do.
Yeah, just
right.
don't.
I
Yeah,
just didn't
yeah.
want to be pressured. And I wasn't going to take it in 2020. I mean, it
Hmm.
was so new. I was like, I don't even know what this is. I'm going to wait to see what happens to people that took it.
Yeah.
And I saw because they, you know, they pushed it a lot. And the sad thing is that the JWs didn't see it that way because they all ran and got it for the most part. I mean, every JW I know got it.
Do,
And
do they keep like strict? So, like the Mormons, right? They wouldn't want blood mixing and things like that. You know, they have weird, I think it's the Mormons, but like weird laws and things about that they follow. Are the Jehovah Witness that way?
so they don't take blood transfusion.
There we go.
So I think with the Mormons, theirs is more a racism thing. They don't want like pure blood
Yeah.
mixing with like black blood. I don't know. Like,
I
show me two bags of blood and tell me which is which, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
Yeah. But so you're not allowed to take blood transfusions, which we can talk more about that because they've made changes on they got new light on that too. And I felt like it's weird because they never talked about any other vaccine, you know, swine flu, H1N1, all this other stuff. They never
Yeah.
talked about that. They never pushed, they never said, you know, if you're a parent, you need to get all of the vaccines for your children. They never said anything like that. So this for me was like out of left field. And the older I get, the more of a conspiracy theorist I become, I guess. And so I was like, this is weird. But for me, because they were pushing it so much, and I wasn't getting it, I realized it. You know, for everyone else, they didn't have a problem taking it because they didn't have any kind of issues with, you know, putting their arm out and getting the shot. And so for them, they didn't see it as pushing and they got it. My grandmother got 4 shots and she started bawling and she developed a neurological issue. She's had surgery on it. She's homebound now because she falls too much. And she's been, you know, she's had to go to the hospital through, you know, with an ambulance and the whole thing. And but she would never say, "Oh, they pushed it," or "Oh," she would never blame them. Even if she realized, yeah, this is from, you know, the vaccine, she would never blame them because for her, she didn't feel that they were pushing it. I mean, that's the subliminal stuff that's going on. But what they would do is they would get on their broadcast and they would say, this many brothers and sisters have died of COVID. Well, you never did that before. How many died of diabetes? How many died of heart disease? The flu? Anything else? You
Yeah.
never
Stop
reported.
eating sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you never reported on death of members for any other reason. But then all of a sudden it was like, look, it was acting like JWs are just dropping dead of COVID left and right. And then they started, you know, saying, oh, well, the brothers and sisters at Bethel, which Bethel is their headquarters in New York, and everybody that's there, besides the governing body, is unpaid. Now, they don't believe the governing body is paid, but they're millionaires. So,
It's a religious union.
yeah. And it's a privilege, right? So they're all, I think they make like $100 a month, like stipend or whatever. But they, you know, they work the laundry, they do any of the printing that's done. Everything is run by Jehovah's Witnesses for free. And they were in lockdown at Bethel. They couldn't leave. They weren't allowed to leave. And basically what they said is like, well, this many brothers and sisters have been vaccinated, so now they can meet together. And they've even gotten permission to leave. And I felt like, sounds like like a prison. What's going on? And so they kept pushing that, the brothers and sisters that were vaccinated are able to socialize. Well, what's the subtext there? If you want to socialize with people and stop being in isolation, then you better get the shot. And I was just like, what is going on? But I kept quiet about it because my husband was never baptized in it. And I always knew he had like a chip on his shoulder. And I felt like if I say something negative, he's going to pounce. Like I just felt, and so I never did. I kind of kept it to myself. But deep down, I was like, why are we still on Zoom? It's been 2 years because we're in like early 2022. And I just couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I was like, why are we still on Zoom 2 years later?
Yeah,
And my
people were
husband
fed
said,
up by then.
yeah. And my husband says, well, they've been selling off Kingdom Halls. No. What? What do you mean? Because side note, we build those. So if you were a general contractor, you were a plumber, you were an electrician, you were anything that they can use, then you were expected to do that
Oh, wow.
for free. And it's a privilege. And so, I mean, I remember that the Kingdom Hall that my grandparents go to, I remember building that Kingdom Hall as a kid, like helping out. We call them quick builds. And to find out, like, it never even crossed my mind that they would ever sell a Kingdom Hall because they always tell us how much they're growing. So why would you need to sell anything? And to find out that they were selling Kingdom Halls while we were stuck in isolation for 2 years, and they were profiting and making millions of dollars in real estate sales, that was the first huge crack. And then obviously the COVID thing. And then my husband said, because it was kind of a three-part. And then the other thing, my husband said, well, you know that they were members of the United Nations, right? No, no, what? It's like, what do you mean? Because of course they're not broadcasting that. Here's the thing, Jehovah's Witnesses are politically neutral. They don't vote. And that's not because like we've all decided we don't vote. You're not allowed to vote. And I think that some JWs do secretly vote, and that's good. Make your own decision. That is what you should be doing. If God is not telling you like voting is wrong, if you haven't come to that conclusion through the scriptures or through conviction by God, then there's nothing wrong. Except that they said no. So to find out that they were members of the United Nations for 10 years, and they applied for membership in 91. They received their membership in 92, and then they terminated it in 2001 because the XJW community found out about it and started calling the United Nations. And there's literally if you Google United Nations letter Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll see it. It's on their website. It's a PDF. And because then they tried to claim, oh, well, we were just doing that so we could have access to their library. So then the United Nations says everyone can have access to the library. You do not have to be a member. Like, stop lying. And if you weren't doing anything wrong, then why would you have terminated membership? Just the fact that you did that shows that you were being sketchy in the first place, and you just didn't think anybody would find out. The internet has been the worst thing ever for them.
Oh, for any creep.
Yep. Because now everybody can post. And it's funny because when it first came out, I mean, it was like, don't go on the internet. It's Satan's tool, all of this. And now look at them. They're all over the internet with their website. JW.org has become an idol as well. They wear little pins and everything's JW.org. It's in their bio on social media. It's crazy that they don't see it.
It says here that they when I Googled it, the UN thing was interesting to me. So I Googled it, and it says they caused an uproar because regular citizens were like, wait, you were teaching us that the UN was part of a satanic world system, but yet you're members of it. And then the Jehovah Witness responded by saying, well, we just wanted to gain their resources. We didn't like their principles.
There's always an answer.
Yeah,
There's
there's always
always a justification. And if you don't buy that justification, then you're an apostate. And so, you know, the funny thing to me is they were applying for membership in 1991. So they have so many books. There's a scripture in Ecclesiastes 12:12 that says, of the making of many books, there is no end. Much study wearies the flesh. They have so much literature. All the magazines, all the books. So in the 90s, we studied at book study, we studied a big red book called the Revelation book, which, side note, they got it all wrong. But anyway, because they don't have the Holy Spirit, so they don't understand the scriptures anyway. And they don't believe in hell. So I don't even know why you're talking about Revelation anyway.
really, they don't believe in hell.
No.
So what happens as a Jehovah Witness?
They refer to a scripture, I believe it's in Ecclesiastes, that says that the dead know nothing at all. Well, your body doesn't know anything, but your spirit does. And so it's a weird dynamic. Like I've even said stuff to my mom of like, oh, like such and such about hell. And she goes, well, I don't believe in hell. And I, now I think about it and I go, we don't have to believe in it for it to be true. Like you can say you don't believe in gravity, but if you trip over a rock, you're going to find out it's true real quick. And so they put in the Revelation book that the United Nations was the scarlet beast from Revelation. And yet
Wow.
at the same time, they were applying for membership.
Do you like conspiracy?
Absolutely.
Nice. That's our show. We have a friend, Brandon Kroll. He's deep into like the mythology and very biblically like sound. If you need a receipt or anything, or man, this guy's crazy, but he will tie it all the way back to the beginning of time with all that kind of stuff. It's really fun. But
yeah,
anyway,
no, I love that stuff. It's funny because my grandfather recently said something about, I don't really know if we landed on the moon. Duh. Like, hello, like, oh, okay, you think Nixon's calling the moon from a rotary phone? Get out of here. And also, like, they lost the technology. Would you write it down on a post-it note? Like, I mean,
Right.
look at our phones now.
Yeah.
I mean, we have technology at our fingertips, but you can't figure that out. And so, the fact that he said that, I was like, is he like maybe this is a little bit of hope, if he's starting to doubt that, maybe a couple steps more, but he's third generation. His grandparents were in it. So, it's a very deep thing. And especially for, the older generations, they didn't question anything. They just, they trusted the government. They trusted what they were told from their church leaders, all of that. It's only now, and now we're labeled conspiracy theorists, but we just ask questions. It's not a conspiracy.
No.
how different was like your father and your grandfather's rule system from like what you knew? Because you said they were always kind of, moving the goalpost or adjusting to what the new light or, whatever they were leaning towards. You were kind of mentioning at the beginning. So how different was that? What did you see?
Like generationally?
Yeah.
Okay,
And on
gotcha.
top of that, was there like, did you see that struggle, like you and your grandpa butt heads, even though you're taught the same principle, but it's just a different way, from different generations?
Well, so I will say this, one of my big videos that went viral was my Jesus is Back video, because I was at my grandparents' house several months ago and I said, I don't even remember what it was like in reference to, but I said, well, I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back. And my grandfather said, what do you mean? He's already back. And I was like, oh, is that what we believe? Like, and that's the scary thing about a cult, right? Is because they can make changes and not everybody's keeping up with it. So, I mean, we're all at different points in the beliefs, which is why they're really not going to the Bible
If you're not
much,
on like the version 1.6, you're off or like whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, and I've tried to point out, because they have falsely prophesied Armageddon so many times. And it's like, and my grandparents lived through 1975, which was the last one. So they said they started, which I actually had an epiphany the other day of like, oh, my other grandparents that converted in the late 60s, they most likely came in because they were pushing the 1975 end of the world thing. And they were like, we got a few years left. Let's get in. And so basically what happened is they said, oh, we've got a new year and this is the end of the 6,000 year. All their math is wrong and whatever. And also, the scriptures say that no one knows. So why are you even I mean, that shows that you're false prophets there, that you're guessing. But my grandparents lived through it and they stayed. They stayed in it. They just believed like, oh, we got it wrong. Although
Hmm.
they gaslit my grandmother. She lived through it. She was in her 30s. She lived through it and she literally said to me, oh, that was just a rumor that got out of control. And I go, oh, I already knew it wasn't. And I said, oh, so they never printed it in any of the literature? She goes, no, people were buying up boats and they were doing that. She was acting like these people were partying like it's 1975. And I looked at my grandfather after she said no, and he goes, they did. Like he just quietly, like it was embarrassing for him. And she goes, I don't remember that. And my grandmother's like a devout JW. Like she was always reading the magazine. She was always doing that stuff. And that really goes to show like how they can change your mind, how they can convince you that was not even a thing.
My mom
It's
still
like,
doesn't
it's,
remember all sorts of things that happened to me when I was a kid, like I think selectively too.
yeah,
Like I think they like you start getting that selective memory about certain things you don't want to not be true or whatever, or you don't want to be true.
right. But as a
Like,
kid, you can almost like understand that. But as a
right.
33-year-old
Yeah, it
woman,
becomes like yeah, it's all just gaslighting. Like, how dare you question us for lying to you?
Yeah, as
well, and they
33
live,
years old, you're like, wait a
yeah.
minute, hold
Mhm.
on. You're not going to sneak that one by me. And then they're like, no, don't worry about it. And you're like, well, hold on.
Well, and a lot of people left, and then the governing body labeled them. So they said, well, the people that stayed, this is the faithful class. The people that left, that's the evil class. And they weren't faithful. Faithful to who? That's the real question. Because God wasn't telling you 1975, because the scriptures go against that. Like if Jesus said, like it says, Jesus doesn't even know the day or the hour. So if
Yeah.
Jesus said he
Right.
didn't know,
Hmm.
you think the governing body in New York knows?
Yeah, they knew when the thief of the night was coming in, so they were standing there already with a baseball bat or what?
Yeah. And I mean it's really upsetting to see your family that you love say things that are just so wrong. They're just so wrong. And it really is, it's heartbreaking because they're scared to question it, especially my grandparents, right? They're old, they're in their late 80s now and their health is declining. Say you woke up and you were wrong, say you listen to me, an apostate, and you leave the organization, and what if you're wrong, and so but what they don't consider is that what if you're wrong now with everything that you've done your whole life.
Um, I asked about those differences there and kind of the generational gap and things like that because I wanted to dive into, and you kind of got there with like rule sets, and do
So
you
my
what?
grandparents are hardcore, like
There you
anything
go.
they say, they follow it. My
Right,
uncle
like
is like the
like the
same
whole
way.
premarital sex thing, like I'm sure like generationally probably changed, right? Like it kind of has just
I'm pretty sure my grandparents did, but they never went to the elders.
see like
Unlike me,
yeah,
I
like
went and tattled on myself every time I did something. and I'm seen as like a harlot, but I'm like, but I did what I was supposed to do. Now, I will say this. So my uncle has been an elder for 35 years. And my dad, his brother, was like the black sheep. So he didn't get baptized until he was like in his 30s. And
Wow.
shortly thereafter got disfellowshipped. But
How how big of a difference is that lifestyle to become an elder and to be the black sheep? Are they
so my
extremely different or like just behind closed doors a little different?
my dad lives out of state. So the funny thing is that, when people find out who my uncle is, because my uncle's kind of a big wig in the organization. And so when people find out who he is, they go, how's he your uncle? And I'm like, well, my dad is his brother. Oh, I didn't know he had a brother because my dad lived out of state since like the early 90s. And so they didn't know. Now they're like night and day. And my dad knows that I'm out. And, he kind of has a viewpoint of, like, you do you, we have free will from God, this and that. Um, but that being said, he wouldn't say that in front of my family. So in front of his parents and my uncle, he wouldn't say that. He would take like, "Oh no, you should be a witness," even though he's not really in
Yeah.
it. Like, but they
Yeah.
don't know. They assume he goes and does the whole thing, but he really doesn't. And I don't blame him. I mean, it's not fun to have to do all of that. But my dad was always like, whatever, like he didn't really care. My mom was and is a devout JW, but there's just fear with it. So she follows the rules, but I will say this, like deep down my mother is a feminist, so I have hope. I have hope that I can wake her up. But I've heard her scoff at things. So when I was disfellowshipped, I ended up moving back home for a short time before I got married. And the elders pulled her aside and said that she needed to limit her association with me in the home. And my mom came home and she told me that. And I was like nervous because I'm like, oh no, this is going to be so awful. Like I'm going to be shunned at home. And she goes, whatever. And I was like, oh, good. Oh, good. I still have my mother. And although it would have been a difficult thing for her, because my mother's not married to a JW, because she got married to him when she was disfellowshipped, and then she got reinstated after. So that's a little JW loophole. If you're
You can get back
disfellowshipped,
in.
yeah, you can get back in. But if you are disfellowshipped and you marry someone outside, then it's like okay or accepted once you come back in. You're just considered married to an unbeliever. Even though he's Christian, he's an unbeliever.
So you could essentially be like, well, I kind of want this right now and they don't want it. So I'm going to get myself mildly shunned so I can still get back in, get what I want, and then grandfather it in.
Yeah, kind of.
What's the
Yeah,
point of repenting then if you're
yeah. So, I mean, she got disfellowshipped and she had been disfellowshipped for she probably started dating him about a year after she got disfellowshipped, I guess, year or two. And then they got married. And I think that I am the reason that she got back into it because I was, hanging out with worldly kids at school because, we weren't going to the meetings. So, I mean, these are my friends. And I think that scared her. I was in like eighth grade. So it's not like I was, doing anything.
you had to
Uh,
keep a specific friend circle even in public school?
So you have friends at school, but you can't really hang out with them outside of school. So
Okay.
you have to create scenarios of like, I've got a school project I have to work on. And yeah. So they
That's
create
not fun.
liars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we live double lives and we learn to be good liars and it's by necessity. And I think that scared her. She started going back to the beating. So she got reinstated, I think, within 6 months. It was fairly quick. And they can't do anything. I mean, once you're married, whatever you did while you're disfellowship, they act like it doesn't, matter. And so nobody said anything. And I mean, they're I don't know if I feel bad for my stepdad. I love my stepdad. He's like the best person in the world. He's such a good person. But I think he didn't understand who she really was, because when she was disfellowshipped, she was fun and more carefree and not living under that guilt and shame. And then when she went back, it came back. And so I feel bad for him, because I don't think he truly understood what her being a Jehovah's Witness was going to mean. And I
Yeah.
don't know if she even told him, like, once we get married, I'm going back. I don't know if that was ever a discussion either. So, but I think she Zooms the meeting still. Like, that's what he told me. Like, she doesn't want to be there. It's a burden. Yeah.
Just not ready to let go.
It's
Do
just,
they? So how do they keep you then from seeking? It was a perfect segue to my next question, from seeking that like outside influence and like questioning against their doctrine,
um,
because
college is
you can see outside influence, like you said,
right.
you have worldly things.
Right. So, I mean, it's always this viewpoint of, and this is a cult characteristic of like an us versus them mentality. So, like, we're God's chosen ones. We're following the Bible the closest. We're doing it the right way. Everybody else isn't. And you see the bad in the world, right? And so, if people are on drugs, or people, they steal, or they do all of this or whatever, and you feel like, but I'm safe in this organization, right? Because these are good people. These are God's people. Pay no attention to the fact that there's like a prevalence of pedophiles, but okay. And so you feel like that, but also growing up, you're not allowed to be friends, like to hang out with non-JWs. Like, you just can't. And if you do, like, say you were out doing something and you run into a brother or sister from the hall and they ask, like, oh, what congregation? And it's like, oh, they're not like that. Now you're getting in trouble now, because you're not supposed to. And then you get, talked to about, well, it's bad association. And if you continue to, do things, or say you start dating somebody, well, most likely you're doing what you're not supposed to be doing. And so then you risk getting reproved or disfellowshipped or whatever strike you're on. So there's a few different levels of the punishment. So there's private reproof, which means they meet with you, they, essentially deem you unrepentant, so they have to punish you. For a girl or a woman, it doesn't really mean anything. You're not allowed to comment at the meetings. Big deal. It's not really a big deal. For a guy, because you can get privileges in the organization, they take those away from you. So you can't comment if you're running the mics, like when people do comment, you hand the mic to them. That's a privilege. Running the literature counter, whatever else they, have them do, you can get those privileges removed. And then public reproof is essentially either like a strike two, or if whatever it is that you did was like public, like other people in the or the congregation knew, and they feel like they need to let the congregation know that it's being handled, which it's not anybody's business, but whatever, they will announce that from the platform. So they would go up and they would say, this is to announce that Amber has been publicly reproved. They won't say for what. If you're reproved for something like you did with your boyfriend, chances are his name is getting announced next. People can put two and two together.
Mhm.
When you get disfellowshipped, so they've made a few changes with the disfellowshipping. So they used to get up there and say, you've been disfellowshipped. They don't say that anymore. Anytime they make a change or they get new light, that usually means they got sued. Okay. So, yeah, I know.
Wow.
Interesting, right? Yeah. So they got sued because the courts decided, and I don't know if that was in the US because I don't know exactly what court case that is, but basically what was decided is that it is a human rights violation to tell people they cannot fellowship at church. So they go, okay, well, we're still going to do it, but we're going to call it something else. So then they get up there, and it was still referred to as disfellowshipping. So like, oh, Amber's disfellowship, whatever. But they would get up there, and the announcement would be, is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, that means you're disfellowshipped, and everybody knows that, and everybody shuns you. You're still allowed to go to the Kingdom Hall. I posted a video not too long ago about a lawyer slash elder, which is interesting since we're not supposed to be going to college, but whatever. And he got up in the Canadian court and said that the only thing that changes with disfellowshipping is spiritual relationships. Like you can't communicate on a spiritual level. Like you can't talk about the religion, you can't talk about Bible stuff, you can't talk about, which seems so bizarre, right? But they say, oh, normal family relationships they still continue. That's a lie. It is an absolute lie. When I got disfellowship, my family didn't speak to me. And that's how it is. And so he got up there and then he said, and they can come to the meeting and they can sit wherever they like and they can sing the songs and they can, and I'm like, yeah, but they're shunned. Like, yeah, you can do that, but nobody's talking to you and you're not allowed to talk to anybody else.
Yeah, how
And
awkward.
that's the part that's the part that he left out. He implied that nothing changes at the Kingdom Hall, which was such a lie. But then they recently were at risk for losing their tax exemption in Norway, so they got new light. And they made another change. So now it's not called disfellowshipping, even though all of us still refer to it as disfellowshipping, but it's called removed. Now you're removed. And basically Norway said, we're not going to give you these tax exemptions if you're shunning minors. Because they push kids to get baptized young, and because kids tend to fornicate, they're the ones getting disfellowshipped. And so they were shunning minors, and the government said no. And so they made these changes, and then they got up there and they said, oh, we've come to a new understanding of the scriptures. And now you can say a small greeting to someone at the Kingdom Hall, which is a hello, and that's it.
Okay.
And unfortunately, so they lost their tax exemption. They appealed it. It went to, I think, the Norwegian Supreme Court or whatever, and they won. But they won because they don't understand what's really going on. They won because when they get in court, they lie and they make it sound like it's not what it truly is. And that is really upsetting. But
yeah, you can't dangle the carrot in front of them and then make a bunch of rules around the carrot and then be mad that they're breaking your rules to get the carrot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then and then you go to court and be like, well, yeah, they were trying to get my carrot. You're like, well,
And
wait
the
a minute.
sad thing is that originally in that court, the original court where it was going, a lot of ex-JWs, they testified and they, they told their stories and they were really brave to do that. And so it's really upsetting that it didn't work out. I had somebody in my comments say, well, I'm just happy that we won in Norway. And I go, what translation, yay for shunning? What are you doing? It's like it was such a gross comment to make because the other thing that people don't talk about is how many people have
it's bullying
committed suicide.
Yeah, they're bullying you by shunning you.
Yeah.
It's a large scale bully.
Absolutely.
People
and my
approach
husband
that.
hates bullies. So
Yes.
that's why he speaks out. I don't know if you've seen his channel. He's got like a beard. His channel is the Helpful XJW, and I think his like screen name is like This Way Out or something. But he makes videos on TikTok. He's not on Instagram. He doesn't really care for Instagram, but he makes videos. He doesn't get as much hate as I do. That's for two reasons. One, his videos are very in depth I do like quick videos in my car, but he will like really deep dive into things, and he's got clip from like jw.org, and he'll show, based on scripture. So like when they got up there and they said, "No, we're not inspired," whatever, but they'll say, "We're not inspired, but we're guided or we're directed." What does that mean?
Yeah, what's inspired then?
Yeah, and so he actually proved no, they can say they're guided or directed, but their own literature for, because they have this book called the Insight Book. And when you go to the Insight on the Scriptures and you look under their definition of inspiration, it says guided, it says directed. It has all of those words in there. And
Hmm.
so they don't have to say they're inspired because they've already convinced you that they are.
Just changing what words even mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
insane.
So let's get to the elders. How do you become an elder?
You have a penis. That's the first step.
Yeah.
um, so the first step is you have to be baptized, right? So you have to be baptized. You have to be in good standing, meaning like you couldn't have been reproved or whatever. If you've got any of that. Now, if you were disfellowshipped and you were reinstated, that's different. But first step is to be baptized. Second step, you become what's called a ministerial servant. So they're the ones that are like helping out at so they're the level below the elders. They're like elder helpers essentially, and they're, as my husband refers to it, they're bucking for elder, right? Like they're trying to get up to that level, and then you become an elder basically by being recommended or voted in, So the governing body used to appoint the elders for a long time
Yeah,
because
I
the elders weren't always a thing either. I don't know when that started, but
I could see the
they,
nepotism there.
Yeah, it
yeah,
seems like a lot of good old boy club stuff.
right. And so basically what would happen is, somebody would say, "Oh, hey, my buddy would make a good elder," because that's really how that goes, right? So, that person gets recommended, that goes to the circuit overseer, which is like the circuit overseer, like kind of covers several congregations. So he like travels to different congregations. And when the circuit overseer comes, everybody goes to the meeting and everybody tries to go out in service. And everybody, it's like everybody's on their best behavior. And so, and then he comes and basically, sprinkles a couple of like, "Oh, you guys are doing good here, you're doing good here, but you're doing bad here and you're doing bad here." It's like a little bit of good, so you don't think that we're, being terrible to you, but they really are. And so it used to go from the congregation elders would recommend somebody, would go to the circuit overseer, and then it would go up to Bethel, and they, based on those recommendations, would decide. Well, in 2000, they stopped and they said, "Oh, we're just going to streamline this, make it easier for everybody," all of that. I mean, that's how they justify it. And so they said, now you can basically recommend the elders. And I don't know if it has to be signed off by the CO, probably by the circuit overseer. And then they become an elder. They will rule with an iron fist for their families, because if your family, say you're an elder and your daughter gets disfellowshipped, you're going to be removed as an elder. Now, if she's living outside the home, that's different. But if she's in the home and something happens, you'll be removed as an elder. So elders are ruling their homes with an iron fist because their privileges are on the line. Their clout is on the line. But they separated from the responsibility and the liability of appointing elders because they've been getting sued, and you put this guy in place, so you're responsible too. So then they go, "We don't know him, we don't know who that guy is." And so they look at it, the JWs go, "Oh, like this is great, oh, it's a blessing from Jehovah," to make it easier, but they don't realize that they've been
There's no checks and
trying.
balances on it anymore.
but they just don't want the liability, because when it goes to court and the governing body is held responsible for putting that guy in place, and now that guy has been abusing children.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something called the Palmer files that my husband is working on right now, but it was basically a child, it was like a pedophile ring from like Massachusetts to Maine. They're like passing children around and
I
abusing
mean,
them.
if you're hiring somebody who does that, you should be held accountable too. It's like you can walk through a supermarket and look at somebody and go, I probably wouldn't let my kids near that guy. You know?
Well, and they know who is doing this. And I don't mean they know like they know. I mean, they actually do know, because they asked for lists from every congregation, and they sent every congregation these little blue envelopes, and they said, put the list of, everybody that's been
Wow.
reported, by somebody else in the congregation. And they send all those to Bethel. And so they have, all these blue envelopes, and it was in court
Is it
recently.
handled within the congregation?
Absolutely. And so there was a court case, and I was actually talking to the one of the girls that was involved in it, and they refused to turn it over because the court knew, because they had been told that these lists exist. They know who these people are. And they said, turn over the list. We want the list. And they said, no, you're not getting it. And they said, well, then we're going to fine you $4,000 a day. And they said, we don't care. And they ended up paying a $2 million fine total before it got settled.
That's insane. That's the FLDS docuseries that came out like last year, maybe 2 years ago or whatever on Netflix. It was kind of like that. They kept it within, but maybe I don't know if the Jehovah Witness are like this too, but they made like when something like that happened within the congregation, the girl or the child or whoever was sat in front of like everybody older and had to describe it. And it's like, what? How is this helping anything? You know?
Right. So they'll even go a step further and make the victim accuse the accuser in person. And, most of these victims are girls, and we're second class citizens. I mean, as an adult woman now, I have problems with trying to be assertive with men because I was raised not to be.
Yeah.
And so it really is a sad thing, but they also go a step further. So they use something called the two witness rule. That is from Deuteronomy, I believe. And it's repeated again in the New Testament as well. And it's from God. It's a good rule, right? Like, you don't accuse someone of something without a secondary witness. Good. That's great. We do that in the court systems now, right? We bring witnesses on to validate it.
Absolutely.
That wasn't supposed to be for child abuse. So your daughter was touched by brother so and so. You find out about it. You go to the elders, because we don't think to go to the police, especially if it's like somebody else in the congregation, right? And so you handle it within, because the police that's part of Satan's world. They'll call the police if somebody breaks into their home, but for stuff that's happening in their congregation, they really won't. So they go to the elders, and your daughter says, yeah, brother so and so did this or that or whatever, and they go, well, do you have a witness? Did anybody else see it? Well, of course not, because that's kind of the whole point, right? They don't do it in front of witnesses. That's how they get away with it.
Yeah.
And so they go, well, we just have to leave it in Jehovah's hands. And you have to bring your second witness.
My hands will become Jehovah's hands. Very
right. Because the other thing is,
good.
so now, okay, so that happened to Michael's daughter. Well, now Matthew's daughter was touched by the same guy, but you guys don't know that. And your daughters don't know that. So you go and you report it, and they go, do you have a second witness? And she goes, no.
That's not the two
They
different
don't.
cases. When
Nope, you've
wow.
got to bring your witness.
So you could essay 40 different kids and unknowing people and be like, none of them, I have zero witnesses.
Well,
You
and
know,
that's what was
39 other kids.
happening in Australia. So there was the Australian Royal Commission that happened, I think, in like gosh, that might have been almost 10 years ago now. It might have been 2015. I can't remember the year, but basically what they had done is they had gathered enough evidence to say that there were 1,006 alleged perpetrators within the congregations in Australia, 1,800 victims. Well, 1,006, 1,800. That's more than one victim per person.
Yeah, math.
Yep. And not one of them had been reported to the police. And
Wow.
I actually went a step further, and I wish I had the math on that. But basically, what the statistics are for children reporting abuse like this, it's very small. So it's something like, 40% or something. Or maybe it's somewhere around 50%, we'll say. Okay. And then of that, it's like 50% of that, they're only reporting it to like a friend. So not an authority figure or an adult, because they don't, and then the friend, of course, doesn't know what to do either. So when you're talking about those kinds of numbers, that 1,800 really turns into like 8,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely. We can get off of that. That's kind of always, I'm like, God, all these religious places, kind of mess with that same fine line on that for some reason. And I'm just like,
well,
why?
so I have a theory on that because, from a spiritual standpoint, I guess I'll say, um, you know, the devil is big into religion, right? Because how can he corrupt what God wanted? And you corrupt it by hurting children because that hurts God. When Jesus was here, he was like, "Let the children come."
Yep.
He loved children and he didn't view them as nothing. And so it is it's a win-win for the enemy. You victimize children over and over and over again. So there's all this negativity and just bad stuff going on. And then not only that, but many of those people grow up and they leave and they become atheists because they go, well, you said this was God. He didn't do anything. He didn't exist. Not exactly how that, because it's not run by God, but
Yeah.
I feel like that's really what's going on. That's why it is so prevalent in organized religion because God didn't create organized religion. Man did. And
Absolutely.
so that's why there's such a prevalence of it. But the JWs are even worse because they do prison witnessing and they only do male prison witnessing.
Really?
Yeah. So like women, like us as women, we don't go to the women's prison and like have Bible studies. That's not anything that happens. So it's only the men and they go to the men's prison. So, that guy gets out. We don't know what he did. He showed up in a suit. We think he's just normal. Nobody's warned, nobody's told, and that is such a real danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're
And
inviting it in.
the thing is that they could have been on the up and up now because there was a documentary, or not a documentary, there was a Dateline episode that was released in 2001 that I actually remember seeing. I was getting ready for the meeting, and so was my mom. It aired on a Tuesday night. And the lady that was speaking out, her name was Barbara Anderson. She worked at Bethel. She was like a researcher and a writer. And they had written some article, some like Watchtower article, something about like child abuse. And for whatever reason, the JWs, like many of them, had taken that to mean like, okay, we need to report what happened. So they started calling Bethel and like reporting all of this stuff. And so Barbara Anderson like realized, oh my gosh, there's like a huge problem. We need to do something. And she took it to the governing body and they wouldn't do anything. She goes, no, 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 something needs to be done. There's thousands. And
Yeah.
they refused. And she said, I'm warning you, you better do something. And so she went public and they tried to disfellowship her before it aired so that they could tell everybody, you can't watch it because she's disfellowshipped.
Sure.
But that was in '01. If you had admitted you had a problem and you had taken steps to fix
Mm-hmm.
it, you'd be on the up and up now.
Yeah, it was 25 years ago, you know?
But if you fixed it, you'd lose a lot of your elders.
Yeah, you got to, I mean, I'm sure there'd be a lot of internal bleeding, you know. There's, I think that's, you know, the Catholics, that's their main problem right now. They're trying to figure out, well, who are we supposed to cut?
Mm-hmm.
So they
Well,
fight
and they
that.
vilified the Catholics. So when all that happened in the late 90s, they were like, look at the Catholics, look at how terrible they are. Oh, this and that. They hate the Catholics, but they follow in their footsteps. So they vilified the Catholics for that. But at least the Catholics came, they came forward. They said, we have a problem. We admit we have a problem. We apologize. I think they set up a hotline. If you have any abuse to report, call this hotline. I think they
Yeah.
like paid restitution, all of that.
Didn't
The
make you stand
JWs,
up in front of the church and point out your accuser. Or,
yeah, that's not a good one. But
yeah.
the thing is that you can't fix a problem that you don't admit you have.
Yes. Yeah, that's step one, right?
Hmm.
Step one, you got to
And
admit
even in
there's a
their
problem.
literature, they say to report to the proper authorities. And I did a video on that. Who are the proper authorities? Because as a JW, that's the elders.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something that's happening within the congregation, you go to the elders. They are the proper authorities. And if you threaten to go to the police, you're told you're going to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. So they guilt you into not reporting.
Yeah, do you really want to embarrass yourself in front of everybody? And it's like, well, hold on.
And like, why can't God defend himself?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're gonna
You
bring
know?
embarrassment to the whole of religion. Well, shouldn't
Yeah.
the religion not just be embarrassing?
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's that doesn't matter that much, I don't think. So let's talk about like the before we kind of wrap it up here. The exit, the way the exit process went for you. Like, how was your experience with that as opposed to like how other people go through that?
So for me, we were still on Zoom. So I essentially just closed my laptop and I was like, I'm done. Because if this is a lie, then it's all a lie. That's, if you falsely prophesy, because I didn't even know about like all of the false prophecies, 1914, 1915, 1925, 1975, all of these. Deuteronomy 18:22 says that if a prophet prophesies something and it proves to be false, well, you don't listen to them because they're a false prophet.
Absolutely.
And they just go, oh, well, they got new light. Oh, well, they don't do that anymore. That's what I get to in the comments. Oh, they don't do that anymore. Yeah, because they got egg on their face too many times.
Yeah.
Like they figured that out. And so it's just for me, once I realized that, because it's not like you enjoy it, right? I mean, there are some things that, and you enjoy the fellowship and you enjoy the people to a point, but I mean, you can't truly be yourself. I mean, say you know, started smoking cigarettes. Well, you're getting disfellowshipped. You're going to get snitched on.
Wow.
So I mean, you can't truly trust anybody because there's a snitching culture. And so, nobody wakes up. And I even did a video about that of like, did anybody get the Sunday scaries, for the meeting? Do you guys know what the Sunday scaries are? You know what that is?
Baby
Like,
Matt.
like where you get like basically the fire and brimstone. Like, is that kind of what you guys would get? Like the
No,
whole like
so
we're
like
all
the
going to hell
Sunday
if we don't change
scaries
our
is like a
ways.
the Sunday scaries is like a term like like you have to work on Monday and so like all day Sunday you're like I don't feel good. Like
Oh,
you're
okay.
starting to like not feel good because it's like that anxiety of like you have to go to
Okay.
work the next
Gotcha.
day. And
Absolutely.
so
Okay.
I kind of put on a video of like, did anybody get the Sunday scaries for the meeting? And people were like, yeah, because it's like all day long, it's hanging over your head.
Hmm.
Like, don't forget, you
Yeah.
got the meeting, all of that. And you're like, and you feel tired. You just like, you feel more tired. You feel sick. You feel, all of this stuff, but you push through because it's God. And nobody is like really thrilled to go to the meeting. The content is boring. It's an indoctrination. It's not like a biblical discussion. We're not talking about God's love. It's always like a downer. My husband actually did a video where he took one of their talks put it into AI and said, give me all of the negative phrasing. And it went on and on and on. It's just a negativity dump. And so nobody is excited about that. So when I realized this isn't true, I've been lied to, I was devastated. Like I was raising my children in this, I was forcing them to go. I was, making sure that they were friends with JWs and, doing all of that. And so to find out that I was lied to, and not only that, I had been disfellowshipped and shunned. And to find out all of that is, look at what you're doing. I was pissed. But initially I felt, so they always tell you, like, don't look at apostate material, don't do it because it'll stumble your faith. Subtext, your faith in the organization, but they don't say that. And so when I started to realize, like, this is total like, I'm done, I still had these feelings of, oh no, am I being stumbled? Is this what I was warned about? I'm falling into the trap of this. I'm doing, like, I'm doing all of the things I was warned not to do, and I was never a good JW because I wouldn't have believed this, and all of that. So you have all of these like conflicting feelings. But the more I feel like a lot of JWs leave and they just go, okay, I'm out. But they don't research. But I was like, I need to confirm this. And just everything that I found, I was like, it's a cult. It's a cult. And I realized it was a cult by watching cult documentaries. Because I didn't think it was a cult. I was just like, this is not the true religion. But I didn't think, oh, it's a cult until I started watching other cult documentaries. And I
For
go,
checking all the boxes for sure.
yeah,
Mhm.
especially Scientology, like Leah Remini's show about Scientology,
Mm-hmm.
which that was very eye-opening to me. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this is just like the JW. So they do disconnection, we do disfellowshipping, same kind of thing, And so it was interesting because in her final season, she did a 90-minute episode on the Jehovah's Witnesses. And
That's
she
awesome.
said that because she's like, we're doing this because we received so many letters, phone calls, emails, everything saying you have to, it's so similar. And she started it with like, I just thought they were the nice people that come to your door. And that's what everybody thinks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she realized that wasn't true. I mean, there were so many people who had family members that had, committed suicide. They just couldn't deal with how hard it is. And that's what I even told my own mother, because I told my mother, I was like, I'm done. And she was like, you just don't want to set your alarm on Sunday. That was the thing she said to me. And I was like, and the funny thing is, like, Sunday morning, like, I wake up early before everybody else and I do my Bible reading, and like I'll be in my Bible for hours, like longer than a meeting would be, because I'm enjoying it and I'm growing
Yeah.
closer to God.
But that's like
And
what you said. That's your mom, in the strictness of it, right? She even went through everything that she's going through and still has come back. So of
right.
course she's like, yeah, just set your alarm clock. This is
Right.
what
But
we
she
do.
left and didn't know any of the stuff. Like, I left
Okay.
because I found out the stuff. So like that's the other thing. Many JWs, like, they'll get disfellowship, they'll come back. Many are actually, so there's a few terms. So there's like PMI, PIMI, which is like physically in, mentally in. You're a JW, you're going, you're doing all the stuff. And then there's like HOMO, which is total opposite, like physically out, mentally out. You don't go and it's BS. And then there's PMO, which is actually what we didn't really get into that, but my husband was a PMO, which is physically in, mentally out. And he was a PMO our whole marriage. So he knew it was BS and he never told me because he goes, you weren't ready. And I
Okay.
didn't want you to leave me. Because if he had said, this is a cult, this is BS, I would have been like, you're an apostate, I've got to get away from you.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so he kept it quiet. Although I will say this, he had been praying for 20 years and he was at his wit's end. He basically was like at the point where he was telling God in prayer, like, I can't do this anymore. I have to tell her. Like, he just can't. And then I woke up. It was like God was like, well,
Yes.
there's another term called POMI, which is physically out, mentally in. And that one that likes me the most. Those people have out,
I think we're losing her,
but
Matt. What do
they're
you think?
still, they believe it.
Yeah.
Oh, me?
There's,
It's getting slow.
it's
Am I
getting slow.
Oh, wait, you guys froze up.
We can still hear you though.
Yeah, for
That's
now.
okay. That was the
Did she freeze awkwardly?
she froze awkwardly.
Oh, dang,
Well,
dude, now you're frozen.
I'm frozen.
But I can still hear you.
Oh yeah, it's because I'm froze because she left.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, man, we're getting juicy there too, right?
All the time, man.
Well, we'll see what happens here.
Yeah.
Anyways, everybody, that was Amber. There she is.
She's back.
She's possibly back. Right?
That
Yes.
I don't see you guys just yet, though. Okay. Do you see
We're-
me? Okay, there you guys
Yes.
are. Okay.
Good.
All right. Take two.
Take
Actually,
two.
maybe take three.
Yes. Anyways, we were on POMI.
Oh, okay. So, POMI is physically out, mentally in. Those people really truly feel the worst for. They're out. They don't go, they don't live the lifestyle, but mentally they still think it's the truth. And that guilt and shame of them not doing what they're supposed to do is hanging over them. So, what most disfellowshipped people would be considered, I guess, are, POMI. And and they want to come back in and they want to get their families back. My mom never did any research. And back then it was the late 90s.
Did you
So
have a did you have an encyclopedia collection? Because that's the best you got, you know?
yeah, I mean the internet was still really new. I mean we had like dial up or whatever, but I mean even if the internet wasn't new. I mean, you've got JWs. The internet's been out forever. They still don't know.
Yeah,
My mom
because like you're
never looked.
seeking information that you're not supposed to be seeking, right?
Hmm. And it's literally like apostates are evil and they're just trying to stumble your faith and they're twisting things and I mean it's all of this stuff. And so um I never, like, that's the funny thing is like I get a lot of JWs in my comments and I'm like, what are you doing here? You're being a rebellious JW, which I think is
Testing your faith.
yeah, like I think it's a good thing though, because um that's the first little crack, right? For you to be a
Yeah.
little bit rebellious and disobey the governing body shows that you're thinking a little bit more, but they're still very like extreme. And I just find it comical because I never would have. Like I never, and I'm friends with a girl now that we met through Instagram and she left in 98. She faded away in 98. But she dealt with anxiety since she's like 5 years old because of this organization. And I just want to tell you guys, like, when we get off the call, Google my book of Bible stories, JW, and look at the images. That's the book that we get as children, like toddlers. That's what we look through at the meetings before we're like really paying attention. When I posted a video about that on TikTok suppressed it because of the violent images. So
Yeah.
that's what we grow up with. But she saw one of my videos. She's been out since 98 and always felt like, oh, it's the truth, but it's so hard for me. And like, so she was struggling mentally. Well, she saw one of my videos and she goes, oh, apostate material. She scrolled on like just immediately. And then one of my other videos came on, and it was actually a video that I did because I got all these JWs that were like, all you do is hate on JWs. Isn't there anything positive you have to say? And I'm like, all right, here's some positives. And mainly it was about getting like new outfits for the conventions, you know, scoping out for cute boys like at the conventions. They used to feed us like when we would go to the assemblies or the conventions, we used to get like these hoagies. They stopped doing that in the 90s, but they were like, these peasants can feed themselves. We're not paying for any food. And so we would get like hoagies. We get like these danishes like for breakfast. We get the orange juice with the foil lid. You remember those orange
Oh yeah.
juices?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, pudding, all of that stuff. So I was like saying all of that. Well, I guess that video came up on her feed and she connected with me on that. She was like, "Oh my gosh, I remember that." And so that just kind of allowed her to feel like I'm just going to look. I'm just
Yep.
going to look at some other stuff. And for her, it's been such a huge blessing because she's like, "Oh my gosh, I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what it was." And you're able to word it in a way that like validates my feelings.
Hmm.
And I'm super proud of her. She actually just posted last night, like kind of her, awakening story. And she's going to be starting a podcast and she's, writing a blog. She's going to, rework her blog to do that. And I just think that's so great.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome. I mean,
yeah,
Jesus never like didn't answer a question, right? Even no matter how much people grilled or anything, he always had something. Well, okay, there was when Pontius Pilate, was like, "Do you think you're," he ignored him forever, and Pontius marveled over it. But yeah, he never denied any question. I feel like you
right.
should
When
always seek that
especially
out
like
more.
his followers. I
Oh,
mean, when they were like, "We
100%.
don't understand this parable," he didn't go, "You're an apostate then."
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Right.
should just believe it because I told you.
I
And
do like how he was kind of an antagonist, though. When you do that, he'd be like, "You fool, haven't I told you?" You're like, "Oh, sorry,
okay,
Jesus."
side note, Jesus is so sassy and I love it. Like when his mother was like, "Oh, there's no more wine," and he's like, "Woman, why is that my problem?"
Yeah,
Like,
right.
"Oh, that's your
Woman, now
mom."
is not my time because he was like
Yeah.
what, 12? Like telling off his mom.
Yes,
hmm
yes,
I
he
know. I
is.
was listening to Matthew today and he's like, blind guides and hypocrites. And I'm like, oh man, he was bold.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's how. That's how you. If you think of that when you read the Bible, then it becomes more fun to me.
Yeah, he
Hmm
When
wasn't
Jesus
always
is
hippie Jesus,
no, yeah. The antagonist is fun.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
that's how it's kind of how it has to be. That's kind of how you are out here. It's not
Well,
that you have a problem with hating on J Dubs or anything like that. That's not what you're doing. You're
yeah.
bringing light to a situation. People can
and asking questions.
choose to interpret it however they want.
Right.
And that's really what I try to do. I'm like, look, First John 4:1 says to test everything, to make sure it originates with God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. Now, as JWs, we read that scripture a lot, but not that second part. They don't read that second part. I never even knew that was part of the scripture. And
That's
so I
crazy.
point to that a lot and I go, you're not testing. If you have taken what they told you and you don't test it with the scripture, then what are you doing?
Yeah, you're not testing the spirit at all.
No, you're following men. You're
Hmm.
blindly following men, and that's dangerous because you've elevated them to divine status, and that's dangerous too.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Um,
but they don't see it.
they so it, are there in the what do they call it? Why can't I remember them anymore? The elders, right? And the people in Bethel, do they have a hierarchy within that? Like, is one man set above everybody else within the organization still kind of like the Pope or, Joseph Smith, things like
Right. So the governing like the people, the members believe that it's like the governing body, right? Like they're all equal, whatever. But one guy, Garrett Loesch, he's he's been a member of the governing body the longest. The other weird thing is like the president of the Watchtower Bible and Tracts, it isn't even of the governing body. Like it's a corporation.
that? Yeah,
It is a corporation. And
that's what it
all the
sounds
Kingdom
like.
Halls are franchises.
It's the
So
subway.
yeah, basically. Because they're all run, individually. So like because I've had a lot of people and they go, well, you must be from a really strict congregation. Well, I've also been in like, over 10 congregations. So like I have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the organization. But you will find that. You will find certain places where the elders are very strict, or these elders are a little bit more lax, or, whatever, because they can't, everybody still has their own viewpoints of things. But as far as like the hierarchy there, so they have the governing body, which is all equal. I don't know what goes on behind those meetings, because they recently kicked out a guy. They bought him a $250,000 home. I saw the deed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting because also the corporation that bought it was called the Religious Order of Jehovah's Witnesses. Like, how culty can you sound?
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. The religious order. I feel like the organization is just creepy sounding too.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a hitman kind of thing, doesn't
Yes.
it?
Does it? See, that's so weird because it's like, but we used to call it the society.
Oh yeah, any society definitely
Yeah.
straight up cult, like
Yeah.
immediately. That's
Right.
That's
cool.
one
We
of the
called
red
it the
flags.
society because it's the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So we called it the society for a long time. And then they switched it over to like they'll refer to it as like the branch or the organization. And I remember saying something about the society to my grandmother, and she goes, "Oh, we call it the branch now. Don't call it the society." And I'm like, so you realize it sounds culty too. Got it.
Yes,
Gotcha.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
There were the Branch Davidians. They were also a cult. So Branch isn't any better.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't talk to anybody else. We don't share our faith with Christians, and Christians don't share their faith with, you know what I mean? Like, we don't get into those conversations unless you're trying to convert them. Because when they start talking to you, yeah,
Yep.
we don't want to do that. So like I had a friend that I was like, "Oh, you can come to the Kingdom Hall with me," like as a kid, like a teenager or whatever. She's like, "Okay, and then you can come to my church." I'm like, "Oh no, can't do that." Like, no, you can come to mine, but I can't come to yours, which is such a hypocritical thing to say
Yeah.
anyway. But you don't see it that way, you know. It's really sad.
Yeah. Especially like if you started to like somebody too, You're like, man,
Oh
I just want
no,
to hang out, but I can't show you my real self.
they're worldly. And that's funny because I've gotten several messages from people that are going like, "I'm dating a JW." And I'm like, "Uh, are you?" And they're
That's the
like,
way it
"No."
works now.
Yeah, they're secretly
Hmm.
dating because the JW is like secretive. It's not secretive on the other person's side. And so they'll reach out to me and go like, "What is going, like, I don't understand why I haven't met their family." And I'm like, "Because they'll be shunned. Like, you can't, they'll be forced to dump you or, whatever." And so that's why we always, date each other. And I mean,
Hmm.
I've had, friends that they dumped their boyfriend and then the other friend started dating them and married. It's like very like incestuous.
It's all in all in
Keeping
the
it
group.
all in the group, yeah.
Well, because you're so limited, right?
Right.
Because you have your congregation and we're zoned. So it's not like I really like this congregation over there. I fit in well. You go where you're zoned. So if you
Oh
live,
wow, okay.
it's like a school district.
Hmm.
You live over here, you speak this language, you go to that hall, you go to that congregation.
Um, so how last like picker here that I wanted to ask about. I know a lot of people like to hit the Jehovah Witness with and then there was the word, right? And the word was God. So how do Jehovah's, right? I know they try to manipulate some things differently to prove that okay, that's
So they
not the
put
Trinity.
they put a God,
A God.
right? So they put the letter A in there.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it doesn't say the word was God. It says the word was a God. They also
Okay.
believe that Jesus is Michael the archangel.
Really? How
Yeah.
do they believe that?
Poof. You just believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't
Okay.
that easy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was in
Well, and
version 1.4. You didn't catch that?
okay.
Right.
So have you guys seen Cliff Nechtel? Do you know who that is? He's like a pastor and he goes to colleges and speaks on campuses. An older
Maybe,
guy.
maybe,
Okay.
maybe not.
He's like on TikTok, Instagram, that kind of thing. Anyway, he did some sort of like podcast interview or some sort of interview, and he was going back and forth with this guy. Yeah, you're blurry. um, he was going back and forth with this guy, and Cliff says, well, nowhere, because the guy was claiming that there were like five generals in hell. And Cliff goes, nowhere in the Bible does it say there's five generals in hell. And then the other guy says, it doesn't say there's not, does it? Well, that's not an argument, but that's basically what they use to justify like Jesus is Michael the Archangel. Like it doesn't say he's not. It also doesn't say that he is.
Yeah.
But that's a cult characteristic. You claim to have special knowledge that no one else has. It's the same thing, which we didn't get into this, but it's the same thing with the 144,000.
Yes.
So they so all of the governing body are of the 144,000, and they call it like the anointed. And so,
Right.
how do you become anointed? You get a feeling. That's, yeah. So
Okay.
eh, ultimately, it's a mental health
Only
issue.
144,000 will get that feeling though.
Right. So 144,000 are going, to heaven. That is biblical. It is in scripture. It's in
Yep.
Revelation. But those are the 12 tribes of Israel. And the other thing is the governing body and whoever claims to be of the anointed as far as JWs are concerned, they never claim to be of any tribe, which is odd. But something that I pointed out, and this is how they will twist things to make what the governing body says fit the Bible. And like the Bible needs to fit what they say, right? And so that's the wrong way to be. But basically, Revelation 14:4 says that the 144,000 they're men, right? So women claim to be of the 100. That's not biblical either. But it says they are undefiled by women. They are virgins. That's literally what the scriptures say. So I point that out in videos, and I pointed that out in, when I've gone back and forth with JWs, and I'm like, well, how do you explain this? And they go, well, that means spiritual purity. Because I'm like, the governing body's married. So they're not virgins.
Yeah.
And they go, well, that means spiritual purity. And I go, where does it say that? And then I say, okay, if that word virgin means spiritual purity, then was Mary just spiritually pure, or was she actually a virgin? And then I get blocked usually, or I get like, get behind me, Satan. That's like what I
Yes.
get.
Yes. Your question. You've asked too many questions.
Yeah.
It was a hard one.
Well, because when they can't answer the question, they literally do feel like you're from Satan, like you're trying to stumble their faith. And
Mhm.
instead of looking at it like, why can't I defend this?
It turns that off, and I'm pretty quick that way for sure.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And it's scripture you're defending it with too. It's not like you're attacking some personal belief of them as a person, like, oh, your shirt's shitty, that's why it doesn't work. You're not saying anything like that. And it's they still don't want to hear it though. It's like, well, hold on. It's like, okay, we're
Well,
not.
and they don't talk about Jesus much because the governing body has basically put themselves in the place of Jesus. Jesus said, no one gets to the Father except through me. Well, they're like, nobody gets to God except through us. Like, you have to do what we say. But the other thing that they do is the memorial for Jesus Christ's death. They basically gather all the JWs, and you invite other people as well. So like I think last year they had like 20 million people, attend or whatever. But granted, you could attend on Zoom, so that's a little easy to do too.
Yeah.
Um, but they pass around the wine, they pass around the bread, and unless you are of the 144,000, you do not partake. So essentially what they're doing is they're having everyone come and deny Jesus by not partaking.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy when you put it that way.
Yep.
And I mean, Revelation still speaks, even though there's 144,000, it still speaks of a great crowd in heaven that witnesses with them, So, I mean,
Yeah. They don't believe, so they only believe the 144,000 are going to heaven.
Yeah. Man, that's
And
tough.
my great grandparents claim to be of the anointed, and my grandmother kind of like scoffs at that or whatever. But what she doesn't realize is back then, everybody was of the anointed. Everybody was of the 144,000 until they got too many members and they go, oh shoot, we're going to pass up that number. We have to. So there's like the earthly class and the heavenly class. Yeah.
Can can you okay, so that leads me to a question I just thought of. Is there like old Jehovah's material that would say would be when they were before or before they were bigger than 144,000? Was there different material then that was like preaching
Yeah.
to them
You
as
can find
anointed?
Right. So you can find old literature. I have to give props to the XJW community. They've been really good at that. XJW Reddit is a really good resource as
That's crazy.
well. But yeah, I mean, that's time is their best friend, right? Because you just
Hmm.
time lapses, people forget or people leave, and then the people that were brainwashed enough, they stay in, and
Yeah.
so they're able to get away with it. And then they really tell you like, don't look at anything, don't read, all of this stuff, and so they scare you into feeling like your faith is going to be stumbled, and so you don't want to risk it instead of, and because it's your whole life like that, you don't think like, well, if it's the truth, you should be able to test it.
Hmm.
If it's the truth,
Absolutely.
you can't undo it.
Yeah.
If it's
Yeah.
the
It
truth,
should
it'll
stand.
validate my faith.
Yep. It should stand up to it. Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Um,
Hmm.
well, we're coming up on 2 hours here. So why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? We're going to put it in the show notes, but say it too.
Like my address. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. You don't want that.
No, I'd have some angry JWs at my door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'm on TikTok and I am on Instagram as Cult.Life.Escaped, but it's Cult.Life.Escaped. But if you look at Cult.Life.Escaped, I'm pretty much
Sweet.
all over there. Yeah.
Awesome.
I know.
Awesome.
I hate the sound of my voice when it like accidentally, my husband will look up something, it'll accidentally, I'm like, turn that off. I can't hear it.
Ugh. I feel that way too, though. Sometimes I hear myself and I'm like, "Oh, I hate that."
And if
So,
anyone needs, to reach out, because I respond to messages. A lot of people are struggling and they're dealing with a lot of
mhm.
hurt. They have questions or, whatever. They just, need somebody to
are
listen or vent to.
are you a
They can.
resource for that? Like you could help people where to look or read if they're leaving and things like that?
Yeah, because I put a lot of stuff in my videos and I try to, point to like where I found that. But I've gotten messages from people going like, how can I find this? Where can I find this? So if you've got any questions about that, I will do my best to help. You can DM me. You can also email me, cultlifeescaped@gmail. I've gotten, emails from people that just kind of need to vent or they're just confused and that's okay. We've all been there. So
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, thank you so much for coming on, giving us
thank
two
you.
hours of your time. This was fun. I feel like we could probably talk for like 10 hours,
Yeah,
but
I
it
I
feel
feels
mean,
like
like
this is all
so.
I
I've
talk
learned
about.
a lot. I like it. I like it.
Yes, it opened my eyes to a lot more than what I thought. Because, like you said, I was that person. I was like, no, they're just little old harmless ladies coming to my door asking, will you see your wife in heaven?" You know,
Mhm.
it's like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to. What do you got to say?
Now it's almost a duty to try to convert them.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I will say this. If you are trying to help wake up a JW, do not start with the Trinity. You will never wake them up that way. You have to point out all of their false doctrine and all of the thing. That's the way to pick it apart because I see a lot of people and they try to go and you'll just never, you'll never convince them with that because that's such a like a basis of their faith.
Yeah, it was. You were pretty quick too when I asked the word was God. You were like, nope, a God.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
And I have to be honest, like personally, the Trinity is a very hard concept to grasp. Like when I woke up and started looking, more and getting into Christian TikTok and all that kind of stuff, I was surprised because I thought it was just the Catholics that believed in the Trinity. So I didn't know like pretty much everybody believes in that. And I
yep.
I I can't say that I do just because of how, I can't really grasp that concept. And you know, I have a lot of people and they go, well, I can show you this or I can show you. And I go, look, I spent almost 40 years in a cult. They told me it was the truth. They told me I could trust it, and it was wrong. So I'm going to let God guide me to truth because I did the wrong thing before. So I'm not going to do that again.
Absolutely.
That's where I'm at.
Yes. That's the safest way.
Yes.
It is. Well, again, thank you very much. We are the
Thank you.
We Figured It Out podcast. I'm Michael.
And I'm Matt.
And that was Amber. And we have to do it again. We do sometime. Cool.
Send me
Good.
an email, send me a DM. I'm down. You know,
Perfect.
I'm a talker.
Yes. Well, thank you again so much. And I will get this all out to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And join us for the next one, folks.